What actually makes an indie game successful? We're usually told it happens when you keep your scope small and get lucky, but that's not helpful, and it's only half true. The real reason indie games fail is because, thanks in large part to all the vague advice out there, everybody starts their games with one fundamental mistake that will guarantee their game will flop. And after years of trying to convince people to not do this on YouTube, I finally come up with a new methodology that will definitively enable you to avoid it and pave the way for your game to succeed. And the reason I know it works is because myself and 22 other devs have been testing it out all week for our new games, and it's helped a lot of these guys refine their pitches from the get-go and start off with a game idea that is set up for success. Since we started, I began refining the process, so if you want to participate once it's ready for the world to see, grab my PDF below that summarizes a lot of this, and once the system is fully finalized and ready to go, I'll send you an email so that you can try it out for yourself. So what is the big mistake? You saw that a lot of these guys were trying to make games that were too complicated, but that actually wasn't the biggest problem. The problem was before this challenge, many of us were dead set on making the wrong game. To use myself as an example, I'm getting close to launching my game Robin Hood Shadow of Nottingham, which started out as an open world RPG, and now it's a stealth game. And it's not going to do well. Steam players have certain expectations for their games, and although there are exceptions, the average Steam player wants to know that he can pour hours into a game he's gonna buy. Which means for an RPG like Robin Hood, I have to build hours of quests or hours of top-notch stealth levels and maintain a high standard of quality throughout the entire thing. That would be incredibly time-consuming. And regardless, the most popular games out there have already done everything I want to do, but they've done it much better, so there's just no way my game would ever stand out. So what hope do we have? Well, it should be obvious. Instead of making games in time-consuming genres that are totally monopolized by AAA, we just have to slightly alter our game ideas to fit into the kinds of genres that are both less time-consuming to make and provide much more opportunity for indies to innovate and stand out. Now, I'll be honest, when I came to understand that some genres do better on Steam than others, I got a sinking feeling because I realized that the game I wanted to make was pretty much doomed to fail. But at the same time, I didn't want to force myself to change it and make the game in a genre that I just didn't care about. But as I dug deeper into these genres, I realized that the ones that do well are super flexible and there's so much that you can do with them. And taking advantage of them is a lot more straightforward than you might think and will save you years of stress in the long run if you're willing to get a little creative. So what are these genres and how do we use them? All of this comes from Steam marketing expert Chris Zukowski, but there are a ton of genres that he goes over and it's not always clear which one you should choose, especially as a solo indie developer. So to make this whole process a lot easier, I've streamlined them down into 5 main categories, and I'm sure that at least one of them will inspire you to either move your current game into a new direction, or just what to do for your next project to increase its chances of success. The first group we're going to look at are management games. These range from city builders to overseeing the paperwork for a huge business. Steam players love the creativity and endless possibilities given to them by these kinds of games, and the genre is just begging for some indie innovation. One of my favorite city builders is Airborne Kingdom, where your city is a flying fortress. But by far the best indie city builder is definitely Islanders for its simplicity, and what Islanders does really well is it strips down the genre to create the best possible experience for one focused part of the city builder fantasy, which is creating beautiful cities. So if you want to innovate on a city builder, think about what other aspect of the core fantasy you can focus on. Maybe the city already exists and you're just in charge of creating an efficient road system for procedurally generated cities. Maybe you're building a single house in a thriving town. Another avenue for innovation is to pair this idea of focusing on one aspect of the genre with the idea of applying a unique theme. Imagine the game where you just place roads in the city, except it's dystopian or medieval or Star Wars. Now let's see if we can apply the same process of innovation to the other genre groups. The next one on our list is open world survival craft. This is a genre you have to be very careful with because they tend to be really big. However, Chris points out that it doesn't take much for indies to stand out. For example, let's look at the closely related farming game genre. The best example of this is Stardew Valley, but that is way too complicated to make. But earlier today, an idea occurred to me when my parents and I were harvesting cherries from my grandma's cherry tree. It occurred to me that every single type of plant you could harvest, like a berry bush or an apple tree or potatoes, is in and of itself a totally unique experience. Imagine a game where your goal is to cultivate the most fruitful cherry tree, interacting with interesting characters, dealing with squirrels that try to eat the cherries, or even just a simple cozy game where you pick as many cherries as you can at a slow pace with beautiful visuals. But what about if you don't care about management or sandboxy or systemic games? What if, like I used to be, you're dead set on making an action RPG or a first-person shooter or a Zelda-like adventure game? Well, there's a bit of a meme among indies where you just tack on the roguelike label onto anything and you're set. There's some truth to this, but honestly, it's not a bad thing. Making a roguelike allows you to essentially make any game you want, as long as you provide the player with a choice of abilities to gain as they go, permadeath forcing you to restart your run and try out new abilities, and procgen. In case you think there's no room to innovate with roguelikes, you'd be surprised. One of the participants in that game dev challenge I have going on had an idea for a game where you pilot a mech. When we discussed what genre would be best for this game, he and I both agreed that an extraction shooter, which I would consider closely related to a roguelike, would be perfect. And having to exit the mech as a core mechanic is a great new kind of decision you have to make in the context of that genre. Another game in our challenge figured out a different way to innovate. Natty wanted to make a game where you have a dragon pet, and after some prototyping, the idea really took shape. In this case, I think he's going for a survival game, but you can easily make a roguelike like this where both you and your pet are progressing, and losing that progression requires you to restart with a brand new run. But what if after looking through all these genres you still feel like they're too limiting or uninteresting? Well, don't worry, because there are still 2 more groups to choose from, and I think they fit perfectly into the 2 main approaches people tend to take when coming up with game ideas. The first group of people are really excited about some sort of story or fantasy. You want to make a game about being Robin Hood, being a starfighter pilot, being a thief, being a soldier. You usually default to thinking, okay, well, I need to make an FPS or a generic action game, or maybe a platformer or RPG to fulfill the story I have in mind, or this kind of person I want to be. But instead, there's a perfect genre that Steam players love that eliminates the massive time commitment required to make those kinds of games, and it will give us a lot more to work with and really focus on that core fantasy, and that is the simulator. These are basically really deep games that simulate a lot of the details, or even just one simple core aspect of being some kind of character or doing some kind of job. The options are endless. You can make simulators about the most imaginative or exciting fantasies like Superflight, a simple wingsuit simulator, or The Falconeer, where you fly a majestic gargantuan bird, or something super simple and mundane like Farming Simulator or Power Wash Simulator. On the flip side, maybe you're gravitating a lot more to some core mechanic, or you have a much more strategic mindset and it's easier for you to think creatively about your game's mechanics. If that's the case, strategy games and deck builders lend themselves perfectly to that way of thinking. If you have a great game idea for a card game or Chess 2.0, then these kinds of games will work with almost any thematic skin. On the flip side, if you want to make a strategy game but you aren't good at coming up with core mechanics, then go the opposite route. Think of a theme or fantasy you're interested in and think about what is unique to that setting that would make for a good strategy game. For example, imagine a deck builder where you're just halflings. A lot of specific cards and abilities could come just from that one concept of being a hobbit from the Shire. Or alternatively, if you were to make a strategy game about Star Wars, then unique aspects there might be blocking hyperlanes, building up ground defenses, calibrating deflector shields, and suddenly you not only have a very unique flavor for your game, but also a strong core that will naturally create very distinct and appealing gameplay. A game's success is built on multiple factors, and a strong genre for your game creates a crucial foundation. But there's still the question of keeping your game simple enough to actually finish and what it takes to make a simple game work on Steam. Check out this video where I give you the blueprint to do just that and make sure that you can carry your game all the way to its launch as efficiently as possible. Thanks for watching, and God bless.